So I actually started reading this story over 5 years ago, but I had to put it down partway through because I found it so disturbing I couldn't even finish the story. But this year I just read The Body and I decided that I may as well go back and read the other books in this collection, different seasons, including Apt Pupil, the one that I had found so disturbing those years ago. Hello and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about Apt Pupil by Stephen King, published in 1982 in his short story collection, Different Seasons. My first edition copy is right here, and it was made into a movie by Bryan Singer, which was released in 1998. So this story is about a teenage boy named Todd who realizes that an old man who lives in his town is a former Nazi who was in charge of a concentration camp. And this man, whose name is Dussander, rather than turn him in, Todd blackmails him into telling him the stories of the camps. And from here, the evil of Todd and the evil of Dussander just feed off of each other, and they both begin to spiral. And so while I do stand by my original thought that this is a disturbing story and it's very upsetting, at the same time, I liked it, which books like this, it always feels weird to say like, oh, I really liked it when it's something that's so upsetting. But yeah, it was very thrilling, very suspenseful. It's a character study on these two evil people. One has old evil living within him. One is a new evil that's just beginning. But yeah, it is one I would highly recommend if you can stomach it. And not only is there violence towards people that is really upsetting to read about, there's also violence towards animals, which I know a lot of people are sensitive towards, so just be aware of that. But yeah, I liked it quite a lot. And the adaptation does have its merits. For example, I do think the two lead performances are really good. And I did want to mention that Brad Renfro, he plays Todd, and he passed away in 2008 when he was only like 25. At a very young age, he started doing hard drugs, and that is how he died. So that is really sad. But he and McKellen give good performances. But the movie has this gross backstory with Bryan Singer, and so that sours an already lackluster adaptation, unfortunately. But from here on out, I am now going to get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So to begin with Todd, in the book, he is a straight-up psychopath. He reads about the camps and is instantly fascinated and intrigued, and he compares the feeling he got when first reading about it to the feeling of falling in love. And so he's just like, wow, like this is my great interest in life, is this like torture and death and violence. And when he confronts Dussander, he tells him he wants to hear about all the gross, gory stuff, or gushy stuff is the exact word he uses. But he talks too in the book about how like, oh, I know when I talk about this in the world, I have to act like, oh, like I can barely stomach this. And how could people do it? It's so disturbing and upsetting. And yet, you know, with Dussander, he can show his real thoughts, which is that he finds it fascinating and he loves it. And he is also a little jealous that Dussander got to do these things to people. And as time goes on, though, these stories do start to impact him and he starts having these horrible nightmares. And so he is very distracted in his schoolwork, and so this causes his grades to plummet, and so he has different stresses going on in his life, which lead him to first killing a bird and then killing a homeless man, and he is only like 14 or 15 by the time he does this. And he also isn't into girls, but as he gets older, he goes through the motions because he knows that is what is expected of a teenage boy, and he doesn't want to do anything that will make people think he is weird or make him think that there is something wrong with him. He doesn't want to stand out in a negative way, which was very much, I just want to fit in from Patrick Bateman. But after he fixes his grades with Dussander's help, from there on out throughout the years, he goes back to being a star student, a star athlete, and is always doing and saying the right thing that makes people think he is just this great all-American kid. And we see with his parents how they are so proud of the son they've raised, and they're like, wow, what a great kid. And every now and then, each of them will like catch a glimpse, like he'll let his mask slip and they catch a glimpse of who he truly is, but then he covers it up again really quick and they'll dismiss it, being like, oh, that wasn't what I thought it was. And they just tell themselves they misinterpreted the look because they don't want to believe otherwise of their son. But yeah, all through his high school years, he is killing homeless people, which again, to mention American Psycho, Patrick Bateman, that is what he does as well. That book came out in 1991. So I'm wondering, like, was Bret Easton Ellis influenced at all by this story? Because there are some parallels here. But anyway, throughout his high school years, he is doing this. And he also fantasizes about killing just everyday regular people and about killing his own parents. And when he fantasizes about this with his parents, it is when he is feeling very frustrated with them. But this reminded me a lot of the scene in The Zone of Interest where the guy in charge, he is at some celebration with his fellow Nazis and he is talking to his wife and he's saying like, oh, all throughout the celebration, all I could think about is like wondering how much gas it would take to kill everybody in this room. And so someone who is so enmeshed with murder and violence, it is going to seep into their everyday life, right? And they're going to start seeing their fellow compatriots, like his fellow Nazis, his own family members, they will start to see them as less than. And also just, like when there's so much murder on your mind, it's going to seep into your regular life. Like you can't have this clear partition, right? Like it's bound to get out. And this also reminds me of the book 12 Years a Slave, because he says how in the South, people were so much more violent even with each other because they were living with such violence by having slaves and treating them so horribly, right? And so again, it's not this clean partition where it's like, oh, I'm only violent in this aspect of my life. Like, no, it's going to seep into the other parts too. And I did want to read a quote from the book, which we get later on. One of the cops says this, but we read, "And maybe it isn't possible to stand close to murder piled on murder and not be touched by it." But in the movie, Todd does not appear to be a psychopath at all. Like, he blackmails Dussander into telling him the stories, but throughout the whole movie, he just is not the calculated psycho. And while we see him kill a bird, he does not become a serial killer of homeless men the way he does in the book, and he also does not fantasize about killing random people or his parents. And this is one way to tell the story, have a kid who is not all bad be led to do this thing which gets him in over his head, and we see how he becomes evil in the end. But in the book, he gets in over his head as the power dynamic shifts, but he was always an empty, evil human who it's like he was destined to do evil things with or without Dussander. And he also has a friend in the movie, but in the book he was a loner. Like, he was popular in a sense, but he had no truly close friend he could confide in. Whereas, in the movie, it seems like this is a pretty close friend of his. So just that right there was a significant change. And another big change is that the book spans years. We start when Todd is like 13 or 14, I guess 14, because I think he's a freshman in high school. And then it ends by the time he graduates. Whereas in the movie, this takes place just in the course of his senior year. And initially, Dussander is controlled by Todd because when Todd first meets him, he says, like, I have all of the evidence against you with a friend of mine, like in a sealed letter. And if anything happens to me, he is going to open that letter and the truth about you will come out. And so that is how he blackmails Dussander into telling him the stories. And he's poking and prods to hear more and more. And Dussander, he too starts to have nightmares. And over time, he begins to wear the SS uniform Todd buys for him. He wears it to bed, and this calms his dreams. And the scene when he gives him the uniform was unsettling in both book and movie because Todd is ordering him what to do, like march, about face, whatever. But then Dussander, at first he's resistant, but then you can see he falls back into it and he is doing it in this mechanical, instinctual way, which scares Todd. And perhaps this is the first time he realizes he has gotten in deeper than he expected. And in the film, I thought this scene was great. I thought it was so well done. And afterwards, Dussander tells Todd, "Careful, boy, you're playing with fire." And this reminds me of a quote from the book, which I want to share. So this is actually from later on in the story. And Dussander is talking to Todd. He's like, you're a smart kid, but you were foolish. And you opened up Pandora's box, essentially. Like you opened up something without fully comprehending its power, without fully respecting its power. And we read, "Down deep inside, I don't like you. Nothing could make me like you. You forced yourself on me. You are an unbidden guest in my house. You have made me open crypts, perhaps better left shut, because I have discovered that some of the corpses were buried alive and that a few of those still have some wind left in them." And in the movie, we see Dussander try to kill a cat, but it gets away. He later must have succeeded, though, because we see flyers up for a missing cat. But then later, he is approached by a homeless man on a bus who assumes Dussander is gay, and so he thinks Dussander will pay or at least provide alcohol in exchange for sex. And Dussander at first tries to get the man to leave him alone, but eventually gives in and brings him home with the intent to kill him. And he does stab the man and then pushes him into the cellar, but as Dussander is going down to finish the job, he has a heart attack and calls Todd. Todd shows up and Dussander locks him in the cellar, and Todd then feels he has no choice but to finish off the homeless man. Whereas in the book, Dussander, he does we see him kill a cat, and he is very calculated and plans it out very thoroughly. And so he's killing cats, but then that is not enough to quiet the dreams, and it's not enough to feed the monster within him. So then he goes to the pound and gets a dog. And then over time, that too is not enough. And so he starts inviting homeless men over to his house. And so he will lure them to his house, and then he kills them and he buries them in his cellar. And so he has done this a number of times, when eventually one of them, he kills them, pushes them down the stairs. And as he is going down, he has a heart attack. He calls Todd. Todd comes over and he just helps him bury the already dead man, and then gets things ready for the ambulance to show up. And then, the reader knows that Todd also has been killing homeless people. And Dussander, he also tells Todd that he knows that Todd has been doing this because it has been written about in the newspaper, but it's like so far into the newspaper that Todd hasn't noticed it because he only pays attention to like the front page news. But Dussander is like, I've been noticing this pattern and I know it's you. And so they've both been doing the same thing basically, except Todd, he doesn't bring them home, of course. He will just lure one of them to a secluded place, and then he violently stabs or bludgeons them to death. And also as Todd gets older, he gets very into guns, which his parents are all on board with, and they buy one for him. And so he will go with his gun, and there is this overpass or something that overlooks a freeway, and he will just drive up there and look down at the people and imagine killing people that are driving along. And so the movie making this change where Todd only kills one man and he is kind of forced into it by Dussander was a change I didn't love. And I need to divorce the story from the movie, because if I just watched this movie on its own, I think I would have liked it well enough. But because I keep comparing it to the book, it makes me not like the changes they made, specifically with Todd. Like, he was just evil and messed up right from the start, like I've been saying. And, he wasn't murdering yet, and Dussander does bring that out in him. But he was a messed up human, and even without Dussander, I think he would have gone down a dark path no matter what. Again, just reading about how obsessed he was with the camps right from the start, like clearly that interest of his, it would have led somewhere, even if he never met Dussander. Whereas in the movie, he clearly had something within him, but Dussander is the one that really causes him to turn evil in a way that he may not have otherwise. And the director is even quoted talking about Todd, saying, "I don't believe for 1 minute that Todd Bowden was pure as the driven snow. The capacity to blackmail an old man, obviously there's a search for something going on that's a good hard step beyond innocence. I think he had it within him, some emptiness that needed fulfillment and taken to a new place, a new direction. His school, his parents, his environment weren't doing it for him. This particular individual, meaning Dussander, came along before some other. But perhaps it could have been drugs, it could have been rape. Todd was probably not a very good guy. But that kind of a bad guy can exist within a lot more people than we realize." But clearly he is not talking about Book Todd here, because saying like, "Oh, I don't think he's pure as the driven snow." Like, no duh. And then being like, "There's that kind of evil in a lot of us." And it's like, I hope not. So again, this is a different take on the story. And I guess this version of Todd is something he found more compelling, where it's someone who had the capacity to just be a normal person, and yet it's Dussander, and Dussander only is what caused this evil to flourish, where again in the book, he was going to be evil and do messed up stuff no matter what, in my opinion. But obviously in both, they are feeding off of each other, but I think they are feeding off of each other even more in the book, again, because their evil is so comparable. It's just that, Dussander has an old existing evil within him that might be sleeping right now, but Todd reawakens it. And then Todd has just like this sapling of evil that is just slowly growing, but then it starts to grow fast because Dussander is watering it with his stories and with his presence, And I want to share a quote from the book. This is from Dussander's thoughts. We read, "He and the boy were loathsome, he supposed, feeding off each other, eating each other." And so, their relationship, I just found it more intriguing and more disturbing in the book, again, because they were more on an equal level. I mean, obviously, Dussander was more advanced and he's able to get the upper hand over Todd, but Yeah, anyway, it's an interesting take for the movie to go in, but I just preferred what the book did with the character of Todd. And also at a certain point in the book, so Todd, he gets his grades good with the help of Dussander. And then after that, once he has killed his first homeless person, he goes to Dussander and he's like, we can cut ties now. Like, I won't blackmail you and let's just separate from here. But this is when Dussander reveals that he now has a document on Todd. So just a quick correction here. He had already told Todd about this document. And so when Todd goes to see him at this point, he is telling him that he and Dussander could both agree to get rid of their documents. That's just a very minor thing I wanted to correct. But yeah, let's get back into the rest of the video. He now has a document on Todd because Todd has known about him for a long time now, like a year. And he's like, I can use this against you now because now you are involved in my crimes because you have been aware of it and yet have done nothing about it. And so because of this, Dussander makes him realize like they can never trust each other. And so because of that, Todd continues to see him through the years. And so they are just stuck with each other because they are both so horrible and so evil and don't trust each other. However, at this point when they meet up, Dussander is no longer telling him stories and instead they just pass the time talking about normal stuff. But it's funny because they are stuck together and yet Dussander suspects that Todd is lying about his document because he's like, this kid has no friends, so there's no one he would trust with this. But Todd thinks Dussander really is telling the truth about his document when in reality Dussander is lying as well. And so again, they're stuck with each other playing this game of cat and mouse, and what they have on each other to blackmail each other, both of them are just lying. They're just both bluffing about it. But in both book and movie, after taking care of the homeless man, Todd calls the ambulance for Dussander and he is put in the hospital. And he shares a room with another older man who in the book had a broken back. In the movie, I'm not sure what he was in for. But he had been a prisoner of Patton, the death camp that Dussander was in charge of, which is a fictionalized death camp. But he ends up recognizing Dussander, and while Dussander is sleeping, this guy notifies someone and he switches rooms. And so authorities then confront Dussander and tell him that he will be under surveillance until he is ready to be let out and taken to Israel for trial. And in both, Dussander commits suicide rather than having to go through this whole process. And in the movie, they posted his identity or printed his identity in the newspaper before his death, whereas in the book, after he dies, is when they print his true identity and notify people of his death. And so in both, we get this printed in the paper, it's just at different times. And yeah, so when this is printed in the paper is when a lot of people learn the truth of Dussander, and one of those people is Ed French. So he was Todd's guidance counselor at the time when Todd's grades were plummeting, and French had wanted to see Todd's parents, but in order to prevent his parents from finding out, in the book, Dussander and Todd agree that Dussander will pretend to be Todd's grandfather and will meet with French instead. And so Dussander makes up a story about trouble between Todd's parents, and he also makes the arrangement that if in the next 4 weeks, if Todd can get A's on his finals, he can pass and all will be well. And this is when Dussander is a taskmaster over Todd, forcing him to study around the clock, and Todd does indeed get A's on his finals. Whereas in the movie, Todd didn't know Dussander was going to do this, and so when he is brought in on the meeting, he is shocked to see Dussander there, but the same agreement is made, and again, Todd passes. But over time, in both book and movie, Ed French realizes that who he met was not actually Todd's grandfather. So in the book, he actually meets Todd's grandfather. And so that is when he was like, wait a minute, who was that guy? Whereas in the movie, he has like this awkward interaction with Todd's parents, which makes him know like, okay, they just said the grandfather was in a wheelchair, so clearly that's not who I met. But then in both, he sees the newspaper, and that's when he's like, wait, what? Like, this Nazi, this is the guy that said he was Todd's grandfather. And so in the book, he goes to ask Todd about this. And this is at the end when Todd is at home by himself, cleaning his gun outside, when Ed French shows up. And after a brief conversation, Todd then shoots and kills Ed French. And then from here, he is filled with like this wild mania. And he goes to run to that overlook he loves to go to. And up there, he does what he's always dreamed, and he kills people, and it happens for a number of hours before he is stopped. And that is how the book ends. Whereas in the movie, he goes to see Todd, and when he confronts Todd with the truth, Todd then threatens him, saying that he can claim that Ed French tried to molest him. And he also is like, you have no idea what I'm capable of. And this scares Ed French enough that he leaves, and we can assume that he never says anything to anybody about Todd or his grandfather. And this is where I now need to talk about the director, Bryan Singer, because on the set of this very movie, a 14-year-old extra filed a lawsuit alleging that he was ordered to strip naked for the shower scene, although he declined to do so. Two other boys, one 17 and one 16, made similar claims. One of the boys stated that he complied with the instruction to undress but did not feel comfortable doing so. Alleging that they had been traumatized by the experience, the boys sought damages from the filmmakers based on claims of infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and invasion of privacy. A sexual crimes task force that included local, state, and federal prison personnel investigated the incident. While some sources stated that the civil case was dismissed due to insufficient evidence, others indicate that it was settled out of court. And it does not end here. Through the years, multiple men came forward saying that when they were in their teens, Bryan Singer molested and raped them. And there was an article that was published telling 4 of these men's stories, and Singer countered it by being like, oh, like that newspaper was being homophobic. And it's like, they don't have anything against gay people. They have something against people who are rapists and child molesters. And so the fact that this comes into play in this very movie is a weird coincidence, and showing that the boy who is willing to make this claim does so as a lie also makes me uncomfortable given the truth about the filmmaker. And it also just makes the story all the more uncomfortable knowing that this is about a young boy who has a weird relationship with an older man, and then knowing what was going on with this director, right? Taking advantage of young boys. And I didn't know any of this until after having watched the movie. And after I read about it, it just left such a bad taste in my mouth, this movie. And I get this story in and of itself is an upsetting story that can leave a bad taste in your mouth. But all this backstory, it's just all the more disturbing. And the molestation threat wasn't even part of the original book. And so the fact that the director put that in here, yeah, it just makes me dislike the movie more than I otherwise would have, because now I'm just like, ugh. It's one of those times where I can't separate the art from the artist kind of a thing, right? And it just infiltrates this story so much so that I'm just like, ugh, it makes me very uncomfortable, to say the least. And this guy, he directed Bohemian Rhapsody, but ever since then he has, dropped off, thankfully. And so it looks like all of these allegations in his past came back to catch up with him. And thankfully, it seems like he is no longer in Hollywood. By the way, he was actually fired from directing Bohemian Rhapsody, but he had already directed enough of it that he still got sole credit despite someone else coming in to finish it up. And at the time he was fired, it was kind of like no one really knew why. And people thought that it's because he was clashing with the lead actor. But now I think it's safe to say that it was because of all of these allegations. And I'm sure that had something to do with him being fired from Bohemian Rhapsody. And yeah, he hasn't done anything since. But to get back to the story itself. So in the book, Todd sees in the news that Dussander has died. And so he calls up the cops and is like, hey, like, I knew this guy. I had no idea he was a Nazi though, but I'm open to being questioned if you need answers to something. And so also there was this whole backstory where the reason he went over to Dussander's house that night, when in reality it's because Dussander had a heart attack and he had this dead body he needed buried. But he came up with a lie. He was like, tell your parents I have a letter I need you to read because my eyesight is bad. That's the story. And so tell them you have to hurry and come over here and read me this letter. And so the cops are like, hey, there was a letter you had to go read. Like, what was in the letter? We think it might be connected to his Nazi ties or whatever. And so as he is being interviewed by these people, Todd feels like he is giving them the right answers and leading them down the right path. And they also have not searched the house yet, and so they have not yet found the bodies. But he knows that, of course, when they search the cellar, it will become an even bigger story, of course. But again, the cops, or they're like from the FBI, and a Jewish guy from part of the group that handles Nazis. It's the two of them, and Todd feels like he did a good job keeping them off his trail for the most part. However, we cut to the two men and we find out that they know Todd was lying and that they are much smarter than we were led to believe. And I loved this reveal because I feel like in stories like this, oftentimes the cops are stupid and the bad guy is able to trick them. And so I liked that here we find out like, oh, they were on to Todd and they were the ones deceiving him. And so, yeah, I really liked this part of the book. And we have a conversation between these two men. talking about Dussander and Todd, and we go on to read, "Do you suppose that the very atrocities in which Dussander took part formed the basis of some attraction between them?" Meaning Dussander and Todd. "That's an unholy idea, I tell myself. The things that happen in those camps still have power enough to make the stomach flutter with nausea. I feel that way myself. But maybe there is something about what the Germans did that exercises a deadly fascination over us, something that opens the catacombs of the imagination. Maybe part of our dread and horror comes from a secret knowledge that under the right or wrong set of circumstances, we ourselves would be willing to build such places and staff them. Black serendipity. Maybe we know that under the right set of circumstances, the things that live in the catacombs would be glad to crawl out. And what do you think they would look like? Like mad Führers with forelocks and shoe-polished mustaches, hiling all over the place? Like red devils or demons or the dragon that floats on its stinking reptile wings? I don't know, Richler said. I think most of them would look like ordinary accountants. Weisskopf said, little mind men with graphs and flowcharts and electronic calculators, all ready to start maximizing the kill ratio so that the next time they could perhaps kill 20 or 30 million instead of only 6. And some of them might look like Todd Bowden. And I love this section because it's so chilling and it's so true. First of all, he says how there's this sick fascination with the camps, and maybe King himself is acknowledging this because he's choosing to write a book about it, But I feel like he didn't write about it in a way that feels exploitative towards the camps, and I like that he also uses a fictionalized camp and doesn't talk about a real one. I mean, he references real ones, but the main one is a fictionalized version of one. But yeah, and then the fact that people who do evil, some of them might realize that they're evil, but oftentimes they delude themselves so much that they think they are justified in what they are doing. And Hitler's followers, they thought that this was a good thing. They were able to tell themselves lies, and they were filled with so much hate that they were willing to believe these lies, which could then excuse the horrible things they were doing. And so, yeah, I like that passage because it's good to remember history and remember how this actually started in Germany. And it didn't start out with Hitler being so obvious with his intentions, and it started out slow and him wanting to, get Germans their pride back and make Germany great again. And that is how he got so many people on board. And then slowly but surely things progressed to what they later became. And so, yeah, just being wary and knowing that evil people don't always appear evil, right? They can be very sneaky, very cunning, very persuasive. They can say the things you want to hear, and before you know it, your country can become a terrible place. So anyway, I liked that section of the book. To move back to Apt Pupil. So in the movie, the cops actually did fall for what Todd said. And so after he talks with them, we get a scene with them in the car, but it seemed kind of pointless because it seemed like they just believed what Todd had said. So I didn't like that change either, because I liked that they were actually smart and already knew stuff in the book. But yeah, so the ending's very different. In the movie, Todd continues living on, and he has become not a psychopath like he is in the book, but he has become evil and capable of doing horrible things, and we know he will just continue on doing that, we can assume. Whereas in the book, he, goes full on crazy and embraces what he has been desiring to do and goes on a rampage before then being killed. But to move on to my book versus movie section. So the book wins. No surprise here, as throughout this whole video, I think you could tell that is what I was going to say. But I really am sad that Alfred Hitchcock never had the opportunity to adapt this story, because as the master of suspense and someone who adapted quite a few books into amazing movies, I think he could have made this story very thrilling, and we would have been on the edge of our seats while also being so disturbed at what was happening. And I also think this could be readapted today, and I think it would make a great miniseries, which I am surprising myself by saying that because I prefer movies over TV shows for the most part. TV show adaptations, it feels like they just drag things out, and very few books, I think, need to be a TV show. However, Apt Pupil, I think this would make a great suspenseful, thrilling, disturbing 4 to 6 hour miniseries. I know we get so many King adaptations all the time, and do we really need more? But I would watch it if they adapted that and stayed faithful to the book. And I also have to mention that the movie has David Schwimmer playing Ed French, and him being in this was a big draw for me, not gonna lie. He's one of my favorite characters in Friends. But I was pretty disappointed he wasn't in more of the movie, and also disappointed by his mustache. And also, again, I just wish the movie focused more on the parents. But again, because Todd wasn't a psychopath, his relationship with his parents was also different because, I mean, yeah, he was deceiving them and pretending to be someone he wasn't, but in the book, like, it was just so disturbing how fooled they were. Again, I think part of the horror of that is the reality of it. Parents don't want to believe their child is capable of something so horrible, right? And so anytime you might get a glimpse of it, you quickly dismiss it because you don't want to think that of your child, especially in this case with that pupil, because Todd, again, was just like, the picture perfect all-American boy, great grades, so smart, so intuitive, and like a real go-getter. And so they didn't want to believe otherwise. But yeah, all in all, I think this story was fantastic. Again, I would recommend it if you're up for it. And then the movie, I wouldn't discourage people from watching it. I don't know. The stuff with the director, if it wasn't for him, then I would be like, yeah, the movie was disappointing, but if you want to watch it, sure. But adding on top of that, the stuff with the director and how upsetting that is. And so, yeah, I think like if you can separate the director from the film, then sure, give it a shot. But otherwise, yeah, it was a disappointing adaptation as someone who liked the book so much. And by the way, I have also since finished all of different seasons, and the breathing method was also so good in that one. I heard someone compare it to like Edgar Allan Poe and more gothic horror, and I would agree it did have that feel to it. And it's a story within a story. And so the club I thought was like a fascinating premise. And then the story within it I really liked as well. And it was so creepy and upsetting, and yet like it's such an interesting message, like the motivation of a mother trying to get her child born against all odds. But also I love how King wrote this female character because it was in the 1930s. And he does a great job writing about the sexism of the times and the women who have to deal with these things. And it doesn't come across heavy-handed. It just comes across very true and showing the reality that these women lived with, right? But yeah, anyway, so I really like the breathing method. And some of the visuals, some of the imagery in that I will have stuck in my head for a very long time. But it's such a great balance, meaning different seasons, because you have The Body and Shawshank, which are so beautiful and hopeful and poignant and inspiring and so nostalgic and so beautifully written. And then you have this story, which is so disturbing and upsetting. And then you have the breathing method, which is upsetting in its own way. And so such a great balance of stories. And so, yeah, if you have not read different seasons, I recommend all of the stories in that. They were fantastic. And yeah, that wraps it up for Apt Pupil. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and stay tuned for my video for Stand By Me / The Body, which will be released next Monday. And I will see you next time. Bye.